is the Senior Marketing Product and Innovation Leader at Fisher Paykel Healthcare, and he's come along this morning really early to speak to us all, which is, we really appreciate that, Bernhard, so thank you very much for getting up early and being with us. He's responsible for all marketing and product management activities for the Obstructive Sleep Apnea business unit. He leads a team of 20 people across product management, marketing communications, business analysis and education. And he's got a track record of medical devices and consumer electronics with broad international work experience. Now my intro this morning is going to be very short and sweet because you've come to listen to Bernhard, not me. So, and he's going to give us his insight on the Fisher Paykel Healthcare industry. So would you please welcome, a big welcome for Bernhard. Thank
you. Well, good morning. Thanks so much for inviting me. It's been actually about 9 months that we've gone kind of backwards and forwards due to COVID. The last one saw me kind of stranded in Chicago due to COVID, and I couldn't come back in time, so it's really cool to be here. And yeah, like without further ado, maybe just very quickly, you would have heard by now, I'm not from here, I'm from Austria. I've been here for about 12 years. My wife's a Kiwi, that's my claim to fame here in New Zealand. We love the outdoors. On the other side is my team. I sometimes drag them to Snow Planet to go skiing. Just because I miss the old home country, but yeah, that's kind of me. And without further ado, I want to jump into talking about Fisher Paykel Healthcare. And I think anyone here worked for Fisher Paykel or in any way? Okay.
Oh. 1972.
the whiteware or the healthcare?
A subsidiary company doing air conditioning and commercial refrigeration.
Very good. It's really kind of a sign of kind of where Fisher Paykel has come from, and I want to start with the purpose because I really think it encapsulates well what the company does. So our purpose is improving care and outcomes through inspired and world-leading healthcare solutions. And I want to just unpack that for a second because it tells you a lot about the company. So the first one is improving care and outcomes. All we do is trying to change clinical practice. So we're very kind of deliberate in terms of which areas we choose to kind of work in. And we always try to be kind of at the front end where clinical practice gets established and where the clinical therapies kind of get created. Through inspired and world leading, kind of two things. One, we play in the respiratory space. So anything that has to do with a ventilator, anything that has to do with humidification of air being kind of administered to patients is kind of our place where we are, very much focused on healthcare. We very often still get, when we're kind of overseas, I travel quite a bit, and the first thing we get is, you guys do really good washing machines. We're like, no, you must understand it's kind of two different companies. But it's on the other hand, from a brand perspective, it's really interesting. Like in the US, like in Australia, it kind of makes sense, right? But in the US, like I've had that quite a bit as well, that people really kind of have the connection still with high quality and innovative products also on the whiteware side. So that's quite interesting. In world leading, we're very much about kind of export. So most of our revenue is overseas, and that is very much by design over the years. Just quickly wanted to kind of tell a little story. It started with Dr. Matt Spence in Auckland Hospital in the 60s, who realized that his patients that were on ventilators and had to be there for over 24 hours had very poor health outcomes, like very much going towards mortality. So he started to experiment with humidifying the gases. So for example, oxygen that gets administered with the ventilator, to humidify those air gases, and he saw really good outcomes with patients who were on long-term ventilation. He then, not knowing kind of how to commercialize this or create a product, he approached Dr. Alf Melville from the Department of Science and Industrial Research, who got him in touch with Fisher Paykel Industries, who were wanting to diversify at that stage. And together they created the first prototype, which literally was a marmalade glass jar, an AG jar, kind of converted to a humidifier. It then took them about 10 years to go from the jar to really commercializing it, having a product that was sold internationally. And for me, kind of like personally, I take 4 things out of this. The first one is we succeed in collaboration with clinical professionals. So we never do things by ourselves. We always work with the people who are on the front line because they understand the problems best. And knowing those problems is where we start, right? Like that's what we're engineers. We solve problems, and we then also work together and kind of refining those products. Most, if not all, of our products have come from some insight or problem that a medical professional has had, and we're very much innovation driven. We understand that the way for us to win is not to kind of be a fast follower or something else, a kind of a cost cutter. We very much understand that in order to survive, we have to be kind of at the leading edge and invest into research and development. We are still from beginning to end in one hand, so from designing the product, really kind of analyzing it, designing it, manufacturing it, marketing it. We've got a direct sales force. It's all kind of in one hand, and that is very important to kind of be able to control kind of your whole chain. And we also are in it for the long run. Clinical change takes time. We say on average it takes about 20 years from the idea to people on a wide scale adopting clinical practice. Because there's a lot of risk involved, right? Like you don't just want to put a patient on something new, like that's experimental. So there's a lot of change that needs to happen, change management, education, clinical studies. It takes a while. So we very much plan kind of for the long term. And 50 years on, the business just celebrated its 50-year anniversary. We're about 7,000 people. More than 10%, that was one of the questions that I was sent, more than 10% of our staff works in R&D. It's almost about 10% of our revenue that we reinvest, and all of those are here in New Zealand. R&D solely happens here in New Zealand. We had about $1.7 billion revenue financial year 22, and we're quite proud that our products are used for 2 of the main therapies that are used to treat COVID-19. And I'll talk a little bit later about kind of our experience through kind of the COVID pandemic. We're international. We've got offices. Our key markets are North America, Europe, and more also the Asian space. Like we've almost had third kind of our revenue last year between those 3 kind of geographies. Usually what we do is we first work with a distributor in a country and give them the training, the product training that they need, give them the sales support that they need, and really kind of work and support them to build the business up. And once it becomes viable, we usually establish a direct sales office. It's usually a very small office. It's like 1 or 2 staff, 1 or 2 kind of sales staff, but that grows over time. And it's always very much kind of in collaboration with the local community. So our sales staff is mostly 100% kind of people from that country, and that's usually kind of how we grow, because it's very difficult otherwise to kind of understand the practice in those countries. Also, another part of our business is working with original equipment manufacturers. So manufacturers of ventilators purchase some of them are also our competitors, it always gets interesting, purchase our products, our humidifiers mostly, and then sell them to hospitals kind of as a package, and that's a big part of our business as well. 120 countries at the moment, and growing. R&D. So as I said, about 10% of our revenue goes back into R&D, and we've got full product pipelines. Innovation is kind of what we work in, and we're also very clear, we were just talking about it, that it's important to protect innovation. So we've got one of the biggest teams of intellectual property lawyers, because some of the markets we work in are very competitive, and yeah, it's important to kind of protect what you create. Talking about manufacturing, we've got 2 sites currently. The first one is here in Auckland. We've got at the moment 4 buildings. When I started 11 years ago, there were 2 buildings. It's been growing quite quickly. We've got space for another building, which is currently in creation. And we're also looking for a second site across Auckland for a second campus. Not sure yet where that's going to be, but that'll be quite interesting. The second site is in Tijuana in Mexico, so just across the border from San Diego. The reason we chose that was it was already quite an established medical device equipment manufacturing space. There's a lot of very strong, very skilled people there already. So for us, it was good to kind of move into that place. Also very strategically positioned, because the US is our biggest market. So from that perspective, it not only gives us kind of supply safety, it also gives us closeness to the market in the US. And also from a labor cost perspective, there's quite a difference there as well. So there's a good balance. We're currently also looking for a third site of manufacturing across the world. I'm not sure yet where that's going to be. I take guesses. But it's important for us to kind of diversify in that direction as well. One thing that I also want to say there is, and particularly about Auckland, we very much believe into the co-location of manufacturing and engineering. We've seen very good things happen through that. So usually what we do is we create the product, we have a process team which creates the equipment to make sure that we can manufacture at scale, and we then literally kind of just through a glass wall have manufacturing in the same building. So you've got very close kind of like distances in order to fix problems, in order to improve. It has given us a real edge in terms of being able to react quite quickly. And given the strict quality systems we are under, that's quite important. Usually once production is stable and we need to scale, we literally replicate that production line and take it into Mexico, for example. We only do consumables in Mexico. All of our devices get manufactured still here in New Zealand. Cool, just talking a little bit about the business. And there is kind of 2 things that are important. The first one is, we're quite diversified, which is, we were just talking about one of our dear competitors, ResMed. We are quite diversified in terms of we have a direct sales force on the home care side of things. So anything that is treatment of patients in the home, and we have a specific dedicated hospital sales force as well, which is a real competitive advantage for us. So we can, quite often, a patient starts in intensive care. For example, we provide the humidification for the patient that is on a ventilator. They then get moved into the ward, and they might kind of get de-escalated to non-invasive ventilation or nasal high flow, but then they might get back into the home, and that's one of the big trends that we see, kind of hospital into home, moving the patients out into the home quicker, and we've got the sales force there as well, so it's really good for us to kind of connect the flow of the patient, where other competitors, for example, only have a home care sales force, so the front end is missing from a sales and marketing and relationship perspective as well. And the second thing which is interesting is, so our revenue is very much across both selling the devices as well as selling the consumables. Both have to stand on their own feet. We're quite strict in terms of the vertical margins that we expect from the products we sell. But it's really important to kind of understand that interplay between selling hardware and then also selling the consumables, because that is kind of the revenue stream that is kind of long term, especially if you look after the customer as well, if you make sure that you have the relationships. On the home care side, we have a very similar setup. Most of our business comes out of obstructive sleep apnea treatment. I will talk about that just at the very end. It's something that's quite dear to me. But again, the same thing, hardware as well as consumables. Overall, kind of the outlook into the future, we estimate about $25 billion of total addressable market, about 250 million people to be treated, and organically those markets are growing quite strongly as well. So from that perspective, kind of across the treatments, we're quite well placed. One of the questions was, what's their new? What kind of new products can you expect from Fisher Paykel Healthcare? Well, there's two. On one hand, in the area I work in obstructive sleep apnea, we've just launched a new product, a mask, a full face mask into the US. So we're quite happy to have wonderful feedback at the moment. So we expect quite a lot out of that. And on the hospital side of things, we've just announced a whole new kind of business unit that looks after ventilation of the patient at changeover, at transition into the operating room. So it's our anesthesia area. We use something that is called nasal high flow. That's high humidified and fast flowing air that really helps the transition for a patient to go under general anesthetics. Usually the patient has to be intubated, which is quite a crucial and sometimes also nerve-wracking time for the anesthesiologist. We help kind of with that transition with one of our treatments. So that's just been announced. We've naturally have been working on this for a while already, but that's just been announced to the market. So that's quite something interesting. We expect quite a lot of growth. We've had it in Australia for a while. It's done very well there, and now we're kind of really focusing on going to Europe, going to the US with that. I quickly want to talk a little bit about our response to the COVID pandemic. Something we're quite proud of, and it was a little bit of a turbulent time. So I thought it might be interesting to kind of share that and do a little bit of a kind of a sneak peek of what happened. January 2020, we heard from our sales team in China that sales were spiking on a few of our products. Immediately, we kicked our crisis work streams into play. So it was around the January timeframe where we realized that something might be happening here, and very quickly things got quite real also for New Zealand. So we had up to 10 work streams, crisis work streams going at any time in order to secure raw material just to come into New Zealand. So all air traffic pretty much had stopped, right? We rely, especially with fast, quick shipments, high volume, high quick turnaround requests, we rely on air freight pretty much in terms of being able to manufacture our products, because a lot of our raw materials come from overseas. So we have quite a bit of raw materials that come from here, from New Zealand, but a lot of it comes from overseas. and that's pretty much across the world, whether it's US or Dominican Republic, China, Europe. Like, we literally kind of source from all over the world. So you can imagine how hectic it got all of a sudden when we had to ramp up massively in order to fulfill the orders that were coming in as kind of the waves were going around the world. And at the same time, pretty much our way of kind of connecting to the world kind of was shut down. So that was one. The other was just even making sure production and operation in New Zealand still was happening. So we were operative throughout the whole pandemic. People were manufacturing. Most people, office staff went home, worked from home for a while, so that had to be managed. And in the factory, like literally, this is just one example. In order to kind of create physical distancing, literally overnight, we went through and created screens. They were kind of, first they were just white plastic screens. The operators told us, look, it's actually really important for us when we kind of work to connect with the other operators. So again, overnight, those little kind of glass windows got kind of put in. And then, so it was all about being agile, being lean, kind of just quickly kind of make sure production keeps happening while scaling up, while still manufacturing. And then later on, like proper kind of plexiglass separations got put in. And the feedback from the operators was they were really kind of appreciative of that. So this is our latest building, the Daniel building, in March 2020, just before the pandemic. This is the Daniel building a year later, the production space, literally completely filled up with equipment in order to ramp up. And we did this through the pandemic. So it was a massive effort in order to really kind of meet the demand. At one stage, we were in a situation where the orders we had, we literally had to go and look hospital by hospital, ward by ward, for example in the US, to look at the order that we got from the hospital, think about whether they actually need this kind of amount. Do they just panic buy? Do they just want to just hoard and make sure that they have got enough? Or is this actual kind of demand? So we had to really kind of manage and go, no, you can't have 100, you get 10. No, you can't have 200, you get 50. And we literally kind of had to kind of manage that manually in order to be able to kind of supply everyone. Because see, on the hospital side of things, we've got a large amount of market share. So people really rely on us. Patients around the world really rely on us. We can't just not supply, right? People can't get treated. So we took that quite seriously in terms of how we treat with that situation. This is a Singapore Airlines jumbo cargo plane. We only did it once, but that was at the beginning of the European side of the pandemic. When the first wave came through, we hired the plane. I think it was about 1.5 million New Zealand. Filled it up with equipment. All of our margin went out the window. We sent it up to Europe just to be able to supply at that stage. I mean, later on, naturally, as we were able to get equipment back onto boats, that situation changed quite a bit. Margins came back, but like there were certain situations where you just had to make calls in terms of what do you do, how do you get all the product up there. This is our sales rep Tina in Wuhan. She was there right in the pandemic. Our sales reps are not just order takers. They do a lot of education. They do a lot of kind of setting up of equipment. They are there with the customers, and so from that perspective, on the other hand, we also had very early kind of information from them as well. It was a very good kind of early warning system as well. This is the last one I want to share. This is the previous Chilean president helping unload some of our equipment. It just shows you how everyone kind of came together to really kind of help get through this pandemic. Just very to finish off, I wanted to talk about home care, and this is about obstructive sleep apnea, the space I'm working in as well. I just wanted to raise some awareness for obstructive sleep apnea. I don't know if everyone knows about obstructive sleep apnea, but it is basically, and I had it in my own family. So my dad, he's roughly my size, roughly my weight. When he went to the doctor to ask for a sleep study, the doctor laughed at him and went, "You don't have obstructive sleep apnea. You're not the typical kind of person that has that disease." So what happens is you fall asleep, your muscles relax, your airways obstruct, and you basically get choked in your sleep. And sometimes you don't even know that. You wake up in the morning, you're tired, you just don't know what happens to you, and the health outcomes that can come from that are pretty poor. So my dad got thrown out of Mount Luxmore Hut and on Kepler Track because he was snoring so badly. He had to sleep outside. Someone came, kind of pulled his leg, and was like, "Go outside." I got him to go to the sleep doctor, do a sleep study. First they sent him back. I said, "You got to go back." He did a sleep study and had severe sleep apnea. He's been on treatment, which is it's called a continuous positive airway pressure device. It pushes the gentle airflow into your upper airways, keeps them open. He's been a changed man ever since. I think it's important also to mention that the adoption of the therapy is not easy for everyone. So it can be quite tricky. There is treatment alternatives, but I just wanted to raise some awareness for this disease because it's something we had it in our family. We just didn't know for like 20 years. Sometimes you just wonder kind of how people's lives could go differently if they knew what was going on. He was thinking, "Oh, I'm getting old. I'm just tired all the time," but it was actually something that was very well curable, or not curable, but treatable. So that's kind of the end of my talk. Thanks so much for listening. Very happy to take questions as far as I can answer them. So thanks everyone.
Had the Daniel building been that you would intended it to become a manufacturing plant?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So absolutely. So all of our buildings in New Zealand have office space and manufacturing space. So the manufacturing space there kind of was already kind of set aside for that, and that had always been the intention. Our buildings in Mexico are manufacturing only. So what we did do though is, so usually what we have is actually you've got office, manufacturing, and then warehousing just behind, so that you have quite small kind of distances. We have started to convert some of our warehousing space in the older buildings, because we've now got in the Daniel building a central warehouse that we ship everything to, and from there we kind of ship out. So we've started to convert some of the old warehousing into manufacturing, because we're starting to run out of space in some of the business units that are in the old buildings.
So terrific luck, or planning on something to have that space available at that time.
It was just luck, really, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think the building was commissioned in May, and the pandemic hit in March. It was just, yeah. I mean, it's funny that you say that, because we were sometimes saying, well, is it necessary to kind of build that early? Because there was still space in Paykel building before, but it turns out it was. Yeah.
Is the manufacturing process automated, or is it very high manpower? Or?
Very good question. So it really depends on the situation. Like I think, I mean, given what I've seen in other manufacturing locations, like for example in China with Foxconn, for example, I think we're not as highly automated as you would see. But there is where it makes sense, we do automate as well. So for example, just going back. So some of
for this mass production of respirators or whatever. Now the COVID is sort of getting under control. Do you have redundancies, or can you resource to other products, or how do you plan on maintaining the level you are? Because it's going to look pretty bad press with your production rates going down, profits going down, everything's going down.
Yeah, for sure. Like, look, I mean, there was at the height of the pandemic, there was a huge kind of need for our products. But from a production stuff perspective, there is, like, on one hand, I don't think I'm the right person to kind of comment on that, because it's mostly on the hospital side of things. But we always kind of have quite a dynamic system between temporary staff and permanent staff, and we really try to manage that as well as we can in order to minimize any kind of effects. But as you would have heard in the press as well, there's just a natural kind of going back of demand, so you have to kind of account for that.
Bernhard, you to me look to have two different marketing aspects for your hospital products. You seem to be selling directly to the hospital, but for your sleep apnea products, you sell to sleep clinics who presumably could prescribe your competitor's product as easily as they could prescribe yours.
Yeah, that's right. So we're actually on the home care side of things. We've got a really interesting, from a marketing perspective, we've got a really interesting challenge. So we always sell business to business, but we do quite a bit of business to consumer marketing as well. And our customers, the sleep clinics or hospitals, depends on kind of the system around the world, very much always stock our competitors as well. And in fact, on the home care side of things, on the OSA side of things, we were a late follower. We were the ones who introduced humidification into sleep apnea treatment, and through that we kind of had a late entry. So it's quite a different situation. So it's a lot more targeted to gaining market share in an existing market, and naturally that's always about how do you have, in our case, a better product than your customers. How do you have a better relationship with your customers as well?
What share of the international market does Fisher Paykel Healthcare have?
In which area?
Oh, well, both.
So we have more than So I think it's important to say it. So the products we do is mostly humidifiers of air gases, and in that space, which is quite a narrow space, right? We don't do ventilators. That's a completely kind of different business. But on the humidifier side of things, we're upwards of 50%. And in the home care space, we're upwards of about 20%. And it really depends on kind of what you look at, but that's roughly kind of what you see.
Governments around the world have had to overspend quantitative easing and the different things that they have done to get them through COVID. Presumably, the treasurers are running out of money. Is that going to impact on hospital care? Also, home care, you can grow your home care, but the hospitals they just haven't got the budgets in.
That is a really good question. Like I think you've seen around the world overall a trend to efficiency. You have to treat more people with less money, and thinking about how we, for example, our nasal high flow treatment is a very good example. We see very good outcomes with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease patients on nasal high flow, where we have seen a reduction of exacerbations, so patients who have to go into the hospital. So we also try to really think about, what can we do to help keep people out of the hospital, so in order to kind of reduce some of the costs. So I think my point is, on one hand, yes, spendings are probably going to come down, or like at least the spending per person is coming down. But at the same time, I think it's not as simple as that. It's really important to kind of think about what are actually the fundamental problems and how can you solve them? How can you help the healthcare system solve those problems as well? On the home care side of things, we have seen, particularly in Europe and the US, we've seen a reduction of reimbursement. But that seems to have stabilized now, and actually, in fact, it's coming up with inflation or inflation adjusted again. So we've seen a turnaround of reimbursement cuts, because at the end of the day, there comes a point, like I'm just thinking of Germany, for example. In Germany, we had a real kind of consolidation of health insurance providers, and also competitive bidding that really drastically cut the amount that was reimbursed for a patient. So usually in Germany, it's like you get for a patient X amount of dollar a year. It used to be 300 euro, and then through competitive bidding, it got cut down to about 60 euro. So in 60 euro, you have to provide a patient with the device, the care, the support, and it got to a point where basically both healthcare providers went out of business, as well as patients really complaining about the service that was kind of administered. There was a court case, and the courts overturned the ability to do competitive billing and brought reimbursements up so that healthcare providers actually can do proper service. So, and you see that kind of across the world, like Spain, you had very similar things. We saw it in the US where through competitive bidding, funding came all the way down, but then at the last bidding round, all of a sudden the government stopped, because basically healthcare providers couldn't bid lower, they went higher. And the government decided to not follow through and just stay at the last level, and started to adjust for inflation. So it's not always that easy, but we've seen some turnarounds, we've seen some cuts. We've seen, for example, in Taiwan, they have introduced reimbursement for sleep apnea treatment at a reasonable, good level. So there's a lot going on. It's very diverse, so it's difficult to kind of answer the question precisely. I don't know if that kind of answered it.
Do you manufacture a sleep apnea unit for home use that runs on 12 volts?
No, we don't. We only do 240 and 110.
He's got a microphone.
Yes. I hear you. That's one of the things that's always very high up. I've got a caravan as well, so it's always high up on our list, but it's not at the moment. At the moment, it's through a converter.
Come on, get it done.
Not it.
It's to be confirmed. Watch this space. Thank you very much, Bernhard. Can I ask Margaret to give the thanks?
When I read the brief of who the speaker was for today, and you take Fisher and Paykel, which as far as I'm concerned is washing machines, you add in sleep apnea, and you're going to get a hell of a mix. It was interesting. I found it very interesting to find out what you folks do. I didn't realise you had such a big complex, and how it all works. So thanks very much for coming and explaining all that. I'm sure I'm not the only one who was ignorant. That was my confession time. Anyway, thank you for finally getting here. It's been a long wait, and I know that Ray's had lots of correspondence with you. Have a great trip back to Austria to your family. I hope the weather's kind, because it'll certainly them so better than what you're getting here.
I hope so too.
And as a thank you, token of our appreciation, maybe you'll be able to fill in all your forms with another 10 compliments of Rotary.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate the time and the questions. And I'll be hanging around, so if you have any other questions,